So, respect, diversity, tolerance, collaboration, inclusion. These are values that have mattered not just for our time, but of all time. Hi, I'm Marcy Sutton, and I care about people. I, as Jameson mentioned, am a web developer. I work on accessibility tools for other developers at Deque Systems. I live in Bellingham, Washington, in the northwest corner of the United States. And I'm here to talk to you about JavaScript and civil rights. This is an issue it really matters to all of us. And my hope is that by the end of this talk, you'll learn how you can put your values to work. You can find my slides online at marcysutton.com/webrebels. I will warn you, there's a couple of videos in there, so you might not want to download that on your mobile device. To continue the conversation, you can find me on Twitter at Marcy Sutton. So what are civil rights? They're the rights of individuals to receive equal treatment and to be free from unfair treatment or discrimination. Some aspects of civil rights include safety, physical and mental integrity, protection from discrimination, privacy, and the most slippery of them all, freedom of speech. But there's no room for hate in this list of civil rights. You shouldn't be discriminated from getting a book at the library because of the color of your skin. You shouldn't be killed on a train for standing up to bigotry. So this is about human rights and equality, and I think it's really important to talk about this. This is something that people have talked about a lot in the past, but it's still important today. Civil rights are about equal protection under the law, and it's important to remember that people have fought for this. In the 1960s, people picketing in New Jersey for equal rights in housing. These folks had moved from the South where racism was in their faces, segregation. They had to explain to their kids why you can't drink at that water fountain or we can't go to that restroom. And they moved north hoping that it would be different, but the racism was a bit more subtle, and they still had to fight for those rights, and it definitely still exists today. Another example of people fighting for their rights are thousands of women marching through Manhattan demanding equal jobs and educational opportunities. This photo is by the American photojournalist Betty Lane. A bit more recent, people protesting outside the European Parliament in Brussels. The European Disability Forum was marching for stronger accessibility legislation in the EU. Nothing about us without us. To give people more freedom of movement, barrier-free environments, and have that backed up by the laws in the EU. So we have a responsibility to protect our users' rights to accessibility, access, safety, and privacy. And there's more aspects to this, but these are the things that we'll cover today. And then there's JavaScript, this ubiquitous programming language that's deployed nearly everywhere. It's pivotal. It can take an old-school synchronous interface and make it more modern and asynchronous. It's sort of the pocket knife of developer tools because of how powerful it is to transform these interfaces. So today we'll talk about how JavaScript can apply to our users' accessibility, safety, privacy, a little bit of security, and when you pull all these together, they can improve people's freedom. Something very important. So let's start by talking about accessibility, a passion topic of mine because I care so much about people. Accessibility is about freedom from discrimination. It's about being able to have freedom of movement and independence. If you think about someone with a visual disability being able to do their own online banking without having to give their PIN number to someone else. That's really what accessibility is about, and it extends beyond the digital world into the offline world. In Norway, you have great universal design laws that really this idea of accessibility is about barrier-free environments so that someone with a disability can live an independent life and do their business with freedom. And a good example is getting on a bus if you're in a wheelchair. You need a ramp. You need to be able to get around in the world. And in reality, it's not always that places are accessible, but we collectively have the opportunity to make that better in the work that we do. So in web accessibility, the digital part of this, it's really about removing barriers. And I think sometimes people don't realize that they're putting these barriers in place by not thinking about accessibility. So I want to encourage you to learn about it. And if you're just starting now, that's great. We can iterate, we can make it better with every little change that we make for accessibility. It's so appreciated. So hopefully you'll be able to take that away from this talk. So disabilities, who are the people affected and what is this about? If you want to read more after this talk, there's a great piece by webaim.org, their intro about the people who are affected. People with visual disabilities who might be born blind or have degenerative vision loss, what we call low vision, and then people who have color blindness, having bold contrast and colors that actually have text labels on them. That's one aspect of accessibility that people might need screen readers or high contrast designs. People have hearing disabilities. You might be born deaf or have hearing loss, and as a result, you need transcripts, closed captions, and alternatives to this rich media. There's people with motor and physical disabilities, someone who maybe can't use a mouse and relies on the keyboard, so you need to see where you are on the screen, and things need to be operable for the keyboard. I don't know about you, but I really like navigating with the keyboard. My overuse injury with my elbow, it was really important to be able to switch it up and not rely on a mouse. And people with other physical disabilities, like maybe you have vestibular disorder and motion just makes you sick or gives you a seizure. And there's people with cognitive disabilities. You might have a learning disability or a traumatic brain injury, and maybe you just need simpler language and easier to use interfaces. It really could be you. So if you don't identify with these groups quite yet, it might affect you later in life. And there's a really great toolkit from Microsoft. The Inclusive Design Toolkit has some ways to think about accessibility and how it matters. And one way is that you might have a permanent disability that you're either born with, or like a friend of mine who got in a bike accident and is now paralyzed. It could happen at any time. You could have a temporary or situational injury, like an arm injury. My elbow flares up all the time. You could be a new parent and have a baby in one arm. So situationally, you don't have the same interaction with your computer. So it's important to really think about it as it affects all of us. So that we're all invested in this idea of accessibility. So what I like about accessibility is that I can put my values to work and really help people, and that's so powerful. So I hope that you can be encouraged to pick accessibility up in your day-to-day work, because you have the power to make the web more accessible. And I have to be honest with you, the web is not the most accessible place, for as much as I like to talk about it. So that's why it's so important, and why I'm talking to you about it, is because each one of us has the power to make it better for the people in the world. So let's look at an example of some poor accessibility. The website virginamerica.com a few years ago was launched as a new shiny Angular app, and it was touted as having very slick user experience. But if you used a screen reader or even just a keyboard, it became quickly obvious that they hadn't thought about all of these interactions. So I'll play a video using the VoiceOver screen reader on the Mac.
Link, more. Internal link, Virgin America. Link, book, list 3 items. Link, check-in. Link, manage. Link, deals, list 6 items. Link, flying with us. Link, where we fly. Link, fees. Link, flight status. Link, flight alerts. Link, sign in. Link, sign up. Internal link, Seattle. Internal link, LAS Vegas NV, LAS, list 6 items. Internal link, Los Angeles CA, LAX.
So I hit the enter key, and the window
Internal
scrolls.
link, San Diego CA, San. Internal link, San Francisco CA, internal link, Washington DC /IADC, IAD. Internal link, all cities. Internal link, 1, list 12 items for sublists. Internal link, ADD, list 2 items level 2. Internal link, subtract.
Okay, so it keeps going. There was a number of issues there that you may or may not have noticed. The first issue was that there were radio buttons at the top for round trip, one way, and multi-city, and they weren't real radio buttons. They were probably coded as divs, so we couldn't reach them from the keyboard, nor would a screen reader user reach them. The next issue was that focus management was not handled. So when the window scrolled and then I hit tab again, we jumped right back to the last section. So our focus was not forwarded on. And as we interact with this interface, these issues came up again and again. The control that we're looking at right now to add the flyers onto this reservation, each plus and minus button is not unique to that section. So if you're on an add button, add what? Subtract what? We don't know. We have to put these unique labels on each of these buttons. So I'm happy to update you that since that, in 2014, they've done a lot of work to make this website much better. And Virgin America has been acquired by Alaska Airlines. This website has been improved greatly, so I want to show you what they've done with it. We will see if this version has audio. Okay, so this is the keyboard version. So there's a skip link now. That's a big improvement. And what's happening in the user interface now is that they have made everything reachable. So the window is visually scrolled, but those radio buttons were reachable now. And if I type into this field to change the city, it will actually send my focus on to the next area. So if I go down there, it focuses forwarded. There was also a banner up at the top that when it selected the city that I chose, it announces that in the screen reader. And so iteratively over time, they made this website way better. And it means that someone with a disability can actually book an airline ticket on this website. Whereas before, they would have just lost their business. So you're really losing customers by not caring about accessibility. So it's really great to see that get better over time, and that's what I want us all to be more aware of. So some UI considerations. If you're building an interface that humans use, which most of us do, you must write accessible HTML. If you're delivering HTML with JavaScript, it's the same basic story. We have to learn a little bit about how HTML works. So I'm not going to cover that, but that's an important consideration. Keyboard support, you need to be able to reach everything. You need to see where you are on the screen. Similarly, but not exactly the same, is focus management. So that issue that Virgin had where my focus wasn't sent, but the window was scrolled, we have to make sure that we're actually in the right area. Localization, if your users are from different locales, we need to make it a bit more personalized for their understanding of the content. And then lastly, screen reader updates. So the banner up at the top at Virgin America, when they fixed it, it actually announced what I booked. So as a screen reader user, if things are happening elsewhere on the screen, I can be notified with something like an ARIA Live region. That's a great tool for that. So something, if you're making an interface and trying to support the keyboard, start with elements that are focusable by default, like a button element. With a button, you can put a click handler on it, say for a close button in a modal window, and then you can bind a click handler to this element. You get a lot for free, so it's focusable, it has a button role, and I can use the click event because it's a button. In contrast, if for some reason you can't make a button element, this is all the stuff that you have to replace. And I think often people will just put a click on a div, and if you do that, the hair on the back of your neck should stand up, and you should go, wait a minute, how do I reach this from the keyboard? To do that, you need to add a tab index. I'd recommend 0, not positive numbers, because then you have to manage all of the tab index. You need a role of button to tell a screen reader that it's a button. And then that click event will not actually fire from the keyboard because that's not a natively interactive element. So you need a key down or a key press or something like that, and then you have feature parity. But you had to do a lot more work. So I would recommend starting with the button. So if you're not familiar, there is a set of standard attributes in HTML to specify accessibility information. It's called WAY ARIA, the Web Accessibility Initiative's Accessible Rich Internet Applications. And there's 3 components to this. The role, which is what does this thing do? And I have an example of a custom checkbox. Now, I only tell you about this because it's an advanced tool. I think we like to learn about some advanced things, but you should definitely start with an input element, input checkbox, because you get all this stuff for free. But the role will allow you to specify the type of an element. You can use an ARIA state, like aria-checked of true or false, to try and replace that checked attribute that only works on a native input element. So aria-checked is, what state is it in? Or aria-disabled, is it disabled? And then a property is, what's the nature of it? An ARIA label is a good example. You can use ARIA label and then a text string to specify an accessible name for a custom control. Now, a custom control could be a div, it could be a pizza button or a pizza checkbox. Maybe you don't want pizza, so you uncheck the checkbox. But this is only an advanced tool that you reach for after you have exhausted all of the native options. So something that might help you if you're doing this accessibility stuff. We didn't always have tools to help us debug it, and when I started with accessibility, I got it wrong. It happens, we're human. So now there's a really great debugging tool in Chrome that you can enable. It's currently behind a flag, so you have to turn the experiment on. But once you have this, you can inspect elements just like you would inspect styles. You can look at the role, if it's disabled, or if it has an accessible name, like a search. And that is a missing tool that we have needed for so long. So I'm really excited to see that land in Chrome for real very soon. But you can enable it. I have some instructions on bit.ly/chrome-a11y. So to get accessibility, so we're not having to make these fixes over and over again, we want to make sure we don't break stuff, right? So testing is a really great place to introduce accessibility. If you're doing things with focus management or keyboard support, you could write unit tests with headless Chrome would be one way. You can also write more integration-style tests with Selenium WebDriver. And I have a test here that is for a bottom sheet in Google's material design. And in my before each, I find an element, I click on it to initialize the bottom sheet, so it's open when I run my test. And then I can assert that it should focus on the first item. And the details of how you write your tests isn't as important as testing that the functionality works. Because then if for some reason another developer on your team breaks a feature and they didn't realize what it was for, you have test coverage for accessibility. And that's really powerful. So this is one example of how you could write a test in your application that's specific to the code you've written. So another tool that you could reach for is something that I work on at Deque, the AxeCore library. You can find it on NPM. AxeCore is a JavaScript library that has a bunch of accessibility tests that save you from having to write them, which is something I went there to learn about. There's a lot of little nitty-gritty details that we keep track of in AxeCore. So to pull in Axe, you can do npm install AxeCore, and then you have these API methods like axe.run, and you can pass it a document reference, an element selector. You can either run it at the page level with the document object, or you can get more specific and tell it, hey, only look at this component. You can pass it any number of options, and then with a callback function, you get, if there's any errors, you can listen for those, and then it gives you this results object. It's a JSON results object. It has an array of violations, passes, incompletes, and inapplicable. And in a test, that's really great, because you can say, I expect that there are no violations. You can say pass fail, and have it fail a build if it ends up regressing or breaking something. Another tool that you could use Axe with is if you do have WebDriver tests, you could use Axe WebDriver.js, which is also on NPM and on GitHub. And it's very similar to an Axe, just using axe.run, except that the Axe builder will inject Axe into the browser instance for you, including iframes, which is really useful. And then when you get this, you run the analyze function and pass it a callback function, and it gives you that same results object. So that results object, you can look at our API documentation on GitHub, but it will find things like ensuring buttons have discernible text. Let's look at another example. It'll find iframe elements if they are missing a title attribute, or if the HTML element is missing a lang attribute. It'll find alt text that's missing, so that's a pretty basic thing that it's nice to just have a tool look at that for you. It'll look at form labels, color contrast, and the list goes on. You can see our entire set of tests on GitHub. But that's really powerful because you programmatically can test for accessibility and not have to write the boilerplate of these tests yourself. So to learn more about AxeCore, you can go to our brand new shiny website at axe-core.org. And that has all of our integrations. You can learn more about how it works. We have a Gitter channel that we monitor as well. So that's one tool and a set of things that you can do for accessibility. But that's just one aspect of civil rights. So let's talk about safety. Another important aspect so that people's civil rights are maintained in any applications that we write. You may have known about an incident that occurred last December where the journalist Kurt Eichenwald was sent a tweet containing an animated GIF, and it induced a seizure because he had epilepsy, I believe. He's actually brought legal action because that is considered a deadly weapon. And the tweet back to him said, "I hope you get a seizure." So the intent to cause harm was pretty clear, and they could bring legal action against this person. I'm going to show another example, a bit of a motion sickness warning. If you have vestibular disorder, or like me, when I first looked at this, I was a little hungover, and it made me sick. So this site is called narrowdesign.com. It was going around the web a couple of weeks ago, and it was a really interesting interface that was pretty new, in that when the pages change, they totally rotate. And there is a little warning that says, do not proceed if you suffer from vertigo or you just hate experimental interfaces. And the link sent you off to a PDF style, just plain page of each of these, which is a little bit of a bummer. Because what we could do instead, admittedly, that is a warning and an affordance, but I think we can do better. By providing affordances to give users the ability to turn animations and motion off. So if you do get issues from these, give the user the control to change it and turn it off. But on the Narrow Design site, for example, we could have used the prefers reduce motion media query, which just landed in iOS and OS X. So there is now a media query, and you can use match media in JavaScript to change the way that your animations and motion work. If the user has enabled this setting, it's under accessibility on iOS and in OS X Sierra. With that enabled, you have a hook in Safari to actually turn these things off. So that is super powerful, and you can read more about prefers reduce motion on the WebKit blog. So what that does when you turn it off, I have reduced motion turned off on my phone, and it gets rid of parallax in case that makes you dizzy, and it just sort of fades more gradually. So that's a hook that we can use to actually customize the experience. And I want to nudge other browsers to implement this, because we want this everywhere so that users can choose which browser they're in, but then still have this power to change our interfaces. So the story with Kurt Eichenwald and the GIF, Twitter has now at least added the ability to remove autoplay, so it's not quite a weapon anymore. But Giphy is another example of a lot of flashing content on a screen. And they actually have an autoplay toggle on their site, and it only works for the GIFs. It doesn't work for videos on the canvas element. So to turn that off, if you absolutely needed to, because Giphy, yes, we're going to look at GIFs specifically, but these are applied all over the web. So as a user, you could use an extension like GIFJam, which I found in doing research for this talk. GIFJam is written in JavaScript. It's a Chrome extension that you can use at the browser level to turn off all kinds of animation. And if you wanted to implement something similar, you could look at how GIFJam works. It gives you a little stop play button, and once the current frame of a video on Canvas element has run out, it will just show the first frame of each of those videos. So that's a tool that you could use as a user. You could take advantage. You could recommend to your users, or look at how it's implemented and implement similar things. And it's worth reiterating this tweet from Tasha's EV on Twitter. She says, "Dear every web developer in the history of ever and all the future to come, don't autoplay anything ever." And it's tempting. You know, we have marketing saying we really want an autoplay video that covers our entire interface. And that's really problematic if you get nauseous and you're just trying to go to your bank website and there's an autoplay video. And you can read more about that on the A11yproject.com. Something really interesting I saw just this week was that the Brave browser actually has a setting at the browser level to turn off animations and autoplay media. And it works on CNN, which is one of the most glaring in-your-face autoplay examples. So that's really cool. And I hope other browsers follow suit. So that's a bit about safety. Let's talk about privacy. As I was researching for this talk, I read an article on theguardian.com, and all of a sudden there was an autoplay advertisement with a video. I guess they had targeted me as an active woman who likes yogurt. And in the next 5 minutes, I saw the same ad on Instagram. So they have definitely targeted me and were pushing these ads at me, but I couldn't turn this, like autoplay just plays. I can't do anything about that. So this is sort of the safety and the privacy together. So a little bit creepy. So websites leak our data. We are often complicit in this as well. There's a really creepy article on cbsnews.com about the data brokers that sell your personal information. They use tracking cookies, some anonymous, some not. Ad networks that measure your behavior, and I saw Google Analytics was pushing their universal analytics, which is hoping to identify users across their devices. So that's identifying information. And they're really building a profile on you, on each and every one of us, to try and target advertising. They say it's to make it more useful to you, but it feels like a violation of privacy. I was complicit in this. Until this week, I had the Discus plugin for WordPress on my website. The intent is to make it easy for you to log in once and then be able to comment on all these sites without having to create accounts. The problem, and I'll play this video of my web page loading, you can see how many third-party assets are loaded by Discus, some that I did not sign up for. I mean, I guess I did by using this tool, but I wasn't aware that it was using all these things. So it's tracking every single user that comes to my website. Like multiple, I think there's 4 domains that load these top-level resources, and then those fetch other third-party resources. And so I have since removed Discus from my website. Fortunately, that plugin in WordPress puts those comments in your database, so I can present them using the traditional WordPress comments. Still working on that a little bit, but at least Discus is no more. So if you're using it, this is what you've signed up for. So free software often means that you are the product. Not always, but most of the time. And how many times do we not read all the way through the terms of use? And our users probably don't either. So this is something that we need to be more careful about when we choose these tools. I found an interesting take on this on NPM. There's a package called Subvertise that was made in response to, in the United States, they recently repealed the privacy controls where your ISP can't sell your data. Yeah, not getting into that too much, but this tool is actually an Electron app that will spin up in the background and visit random sites to muddy up your history so that what they're selling isn't actually as useful. So pretty subversive, and I thought that was an interesting thing. It definitely uses up data, so if you have per megabyte data, you probably don't want to use that. Another tool called Sheriff, this one is, I could see using this one a bit more easily. The official code sharing snippets from Facebook, Google+, and Twitter, they quietly siphon your users' personal data. Facebook is watching every user that uses this like button across the web and then using that to sell advertising. These buttons, share buttons, aren't implemented the same way. So if you wanted to provide a useful sharing button to your user, you could do it a bit more responsibly so that you're not just leaking their personal data. Websites can track us. They may or may not take advantage of this, but any site that you visit they can use JavaScript to track what you type. It's a little creepy, but that's just kind of the way the web works. So if you are bothered by that, the building of your profile, there's a Chrome extension that Naked Security made where you can actually have it sort of obfuscate how you type and make it more difficult for these networks to build a profile on you. Now, if you think about that and how creepy that is, think about having a disability or some issue that might impact how you interact with the web. In the last few weeks, my friend Leonie Watson, who is blind and uses a screen reader, tweeted, Facebook was using educated guesses to trap people into confirming they have a disability. Now, Facebook doesn't actually know that she has a screen reader because there's no way to track a screen reader. They made educated guesses and presented a survey so that then the user would take the survey and say, yes, I have a disability. This is problematic to a lot of users with disabilities. As tempting as it is to want to, but I want to personalize the experience and try to get better at accessibility, most people with disabilities do not want to be tracked. They want to be able to freely move around the web. And another example is this article by Marco Zija. He's written about why screen reader detection on the web is a bad thing because it's like waving a white flag and saying, hi, I'm disabled, where otherwise it's the one place they can go relatively undetected on the web. So if we're using this tracking, there's so many ways this could be used against us or used against our users. You could have an employer not hire you because they think you might be getting pregnant soon. Like all of these ways that you could discriminate, and people with disabilities are sort of on the forefront of this issue of not wanting to be discriminated against. So here's one thing you can do if you're trying to make the case for accessibility. You can't track screen readers and users with disabilities for obvious privacy reasons. But if you are trying to get a little bit more metrics on how people use your site, this isn't specific to people with disabilities. This is more general. You could use analytics to measure accessible events. So if you have a menu and it has keyboard support, you could use event-level tracking to actually measure if people are using that in the way that you're expecting. Now, I will also add an asterisk here that if you are using Google Analytics, by signing up the terms of use, you actually are obligated to have a privacy policy and a way for the user to opt out. I was not following that until yesterday, I will admit. And I've been using Google Analytics for years. So I learned a lot in researching for this talk, and I have a privacy policy now. But that gives users a way to understand how you're using their data. It's anonymous. It tells them, or tells you how they got to your site, what content is relevant. So if you want to know, what mobile device they're on so you can make the design look better for them, I think that's a fair trade. But you should notify users that that's what's happening. And a privacy policy is good for that. So to recap, accessibility is a civil right. I think that was an important line to draw in the sand for me this year because it really took it beyond just accessibility is the right thing to do, and it's really about human rights and equality. Safety and privacy are wrapped up in this as well because these are all interlinked. Honoring our users' rights to privacy and access and security and all of these things, it's about making things that treat our users with respect. Our work really impacts people's lives. I often have to say, who are you designing this for? It's not for ourselves, even though in this aspect it sort of is. These are all concerns that affect every one of us, and our friends and family, our customers, and our users. We impact people's lives with the things that we build, so let's try and do right by them. So we can make a difference, and I hope that you will. Thanks so much for having me. That's it.
Great job.
Thanks.
So, it's careful.
It's cute, though. It's a cute coach.
It's precarious. One question that an audience member had is, you brought up screen readers and you showed an example of that was the Mac OS screen reader, right?
Yeah, VoiceOver. Which, if you have a Mac or an iPhone or an Android device, there's lots of screen readers.
Yeah, they kind of have the same issues that cross-browser development had, though, right? Don't they all behave a little bit differently? Is there some kind of service like Browser Stack, but for screen readers, that will allow you to test your website on a bunch of different screen readers without needing to have them all installed, or is it?
Not yet. I've heard people asking Browser Stack for that. The challenge is that screen readers you can't program them to operate like Selenium WebDriver. it's possible, just no one's done it yet. So with VoiceOver, theoretically you could do it with AppleScript, with NVDA, which is a free open source screen reader on Windows. Theoretically you could do it, but no one's done it yet. So that would be really useful. Because part of the challenge is that unless you're a proficient screen reader user, you might not be testing it in the way that a user would.
Yeah. So there's a lot of domain knowledge at like the technical level and also just the user level, it sounds like.
So yeah, I'd say that's, if somebody wants a good challenge that could potentially be a business, that would be really incredible. That's kind of the next big thing that I think we need to get better at.
Free startup idea.
Yeah.
Sorry if I gave away your startup idea to several hundred people.
It's for the good of all of us, so that'd be cool.
Someone said a nice thing. I'm so glad Marcy Sutton takes Web Rebels beyond JS and touches on accessibility matters. We need to be better at this. Thank you for saying nice things. That was great.
Oh, thanks.
Another question I had is your talk was very motivating to me as a developer. I work in a commercial context, which is less motivated by things like being nice to people and civil rights and more motivated by money. How do you work within a business like that to help them prioritize this?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It sort of depends on where you live. In the US, the legal risk is a big stick. And in the EU, and more so here in Norway, it's more about the carrot and doing it for the good of people. It's sort of a cultural thing to try and make sites as clean and hygienic and bug-free. It's about quality to a lot of people. But I know in the US that legal risk is very important, and that's why the legislation, like accessibility, is inherently political, because the laws are very important to get people to do the right thing.
Sure.
So yeah, it can be challenging, I guess, depending on what tier of business you work in. Sometimes it's motivating to say you're losing customers. People who are blind want to buy stuff just as much as other people do, so you could take that angle. You could make it about quality. I think that's a good way to reach developers. And it's important to remember that you can start small. Like every little thing that you do is so appreciated. So try not to get overwhelmed by it and just start iterating each feature you touch. Try and make it part of your definition of done. And that's how you can kind of just do it over time instead of trying to fix it all at once. That would be daunting.
Yeah. Another theme, I feel like I've seen you talk about this at other talks and this one as well, is how you make complex JavaScript apps accessible. It seems like one solution is don't do them. And if you just render HTML, that's pretty accessible by default. But how do we wrestle with all these rich, single-page applications and making those accessible?
I think there's definitely ways to do it. And like the narrow design example, I think that we can use these tools and really lean on browsers to give us these tools so that you can make it personalized. I think it's challenging to make something that works for absolutely everyone. So making it look good in high contrast mode, or making it zoom so that the user can change it. Those are some examples, but in a JavaScript app, there's some basics that you just need to be aware of if you're doing these single-page apps, like focus management and announcing things to screen readers. And I wrote an article called Notes on Client-Rendered Accessibility. If you're interested in that, it's on Smashing Magazine. That was to try and document the things I'd learned on the Angular team about how do you make that accessible? Because it is possible. Mm-hmm. We just it's something we need to know about, along with security and privacy, those kinds of things.
Sure. It seems like it's, right now it could be looked at as a niche skill set, and the goal is to make it not niche. It's to make it CSS, accessibility. Is that a good way of putting it?
Yeah, definitely. And that's why testing is a great place to kind of get it in the door. And to try and document it so that you don't have one person on the team who's the only one that knows.
Yeah, and then they're the nagger whose job it is to get you in trouble. You did this wrong.
Yeah, and you, as that person, you have to keep on top of everything, and that's just not possible.
Yeah.
So it's really helpful to kind of bring people along and make it everyone's job, not just one person, because it's just frankly not going to be successful if only one person is doing it. I mean, it even goes back to design. I focus more on development development, but it really starts with UX and design. So it's everyone's responsibility.
Sure.
And it can be really cool. Like, that's what I think is so exciting, is that it doesn't have to be basic HTML only. You can make these rich applications that are going to end up more useful for everyone. It's like when my elbow flares up, I just don't want to go anywhere near a computer, because frankly, it's pretty bad out there.
Yeah.
So that's why I think each one of us, each website we build, we can improve this situation.
Yeah, that makes sense. Great. Well, thank you so much for your talk. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Give Marcy one more round of applause. Good work. Cool.